In this video help, we're going to be addressing the inventory for equipment, items, and consumables. Before we leave there, I want to make sure that you realize that the billing uses that information, and also the equipment status and service records use data from the inventory. We already covered this information. If you need to go back, you can go back to the information for the customer information screen and repeat that viewing. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about where it's at on the application. We have the equipment inventory, and I'm going to go ahead and go to that. In the equipment inventory, the screens that are a part of the equipment inventory are the work order page 1 and 2, the work order portal, the work order list view, and there's a status, which is a listing item that is on the screen for list items, and stock serial numbers, which is a item over here on this side. And there are some buttons over here that bring popovers up to add additional information, which we'll cover separately. Let's go ahead and start from the top of the screen. We have our typical app map and our do action menu. And when you're in the application, the add record button, which is add equipment, would add a new inventory item. So the first thing you would do when you're adding a new item is to just click this and bring up a blank record where all the fields would be emptied out, and now you're able to start adding that information for a new record. Now, one of the things that you can do, you see these 3 buttons at the top of the screen. These are drop-down lists, and what happens, it gives you the option for the following: to specify what this actual inventory item is, as far as the content that would be in this would either be, in this case, this one was set up as a subassembly, but you could have a company vehicle, a customer vehicle, and obviously these would be records that are related to a specific vehicle that only the customer would have, or in this case, your own pool of equipment that you work with. Then there would be a major assembly, which would be below that vehicle, but a part of that vehicle. The next one would be a subassembly, which is part of a major assembly within there. Let's take, for example, what would that be? A major assembly might be the engine, and the subassembly may be a carburetor or fuel injection, or it could be a repair part that is part of an assembly or a subassembly, and that thing could repair either of these two. So that would be a repair part. So it would be part of one, either a subassembly or a major assembly. For example, it may be a bracket that holds down either a subassembly or a major assembly, like say, for example, this particular computer box. That would be a good example. And there would be hold downs, like we talked about screws, holding that box down. Now, obviously, the label on this one indicates that there is a serial number also for this item, and we'll be explaining that later as we go down through here. Consumables are things like oil, rags, transmission fluid, rear axle oil, and those kinds of things that are consumables. The other is something that is odd, and maybe other that is something that can be brought to the actual piece of equipment as an ancillary piece of that equipment that is being repaired. Okay, the next thing is the source supplied. In this particular case, who actually supplied it? The company you belong in, the client's company. It was cannibalized parts, salvage parts, or other. So they can have different things. For example, if you have certain brackets or things like that that are taken off of a part or a subassembly or an assembly, and you want to re-put those into the inventory system because they're reusable and you're trashing the rest of the item, then you can go ahead and put that in there as a salvage part. The next one is a list of billing notes. Now, these are kind of universal. They're used throughout the application, and you can edit those by clicking on the underlying billing header. But what it does is it gives you a list of items that you can use within this to further identify a status. And this is where you can get creative and put them in there yourself if you want to. And you can note that you can see quote here. Well, in the invoice, there's also quote in there. So these are being used in multiple places so that you get used to having this list available to you in several different locations within the application. Anything that you add in the list of billing notes would be used in the invoice, for example, here in the inventory and also on the purchase records. So those would be where you'd see those kind of things. Now let's go over it and look at the actual information for the equipment ID. This is where you have some flexibility. Most people would recognize that there are certain parts from different vendors, even though they are a part that you can put on a vehicle or in assemblies or sub-assemblies. The part number may vary. What I mean by that is if you buy it from a different vendor, there may be a different part number associated with that. So you need to be aware of that. Or what you can do is you can create your own internal part numbers, but give specific comments over here about the different uh, vendors. And down here, for example, equipment parts supplied comments. You could go down there and say, well, there's a C86 and so forth that is coming from a certain thing like Keller, but there may be a different part number from a different vendor that is the same item, and then you can create your own part number as well that is your part number for internal in your company to manage multiple parts that are identical, like in a subsystem or a subassembly, that particular part is usable on all those types of equipment, like a generator mount or say like the wafer underneath of a carburetor for a certain type of carburetor, which might be a separate part. That part can now be used with one number for your system, and then you can have multiple vendors that would provide it with several different part numbers. Also within this, you can comment if there are specific things about this part. For example, does it have a shelf life, or is it a only used on? When we call used on is a situation where it can only be used on certain model years of a vehicle, and it's not applicable to all models, so you don't go looking for the wrong part. Okay, the next thing that you're looking at, and this is really up to you, by the way. You can put whatever you want as far as that is concerned, as long as it works for your company. The next thing is the actual narrative description, and you want to keep this fairly short but concise. What this is used for is basically recognizing the part description or nomenclature. You can take it off of what is on the actual part. For example, this Bosch thing down here may have a description down here that may say something about what it is over here. What you can do is you can use that, but you want to recognize that if you abbreviate it, it'll be a lot easier to understand what it is when you're actually using it in an invoice. Now this one is fairly long, and it might be actually too long where it might truncate some of the information. So you want to make the first part of this as concise as you want this thing to be. For example, main computer, 5-ton flatbed truck. You can put it around whatever way it makes sense for you to find that item. The next thing we're looking at is the equipment type, and because it's an underlined thing here, you can tell that with a drop-down list, you're going to have the option to edit this to whatever you need it to be. And you can see this is chassis, undercarriage, controllers, drivetrain, engine parts, and so forth. And you can make this yours and put it in whatever way you want to as far as these things are concerned. And you can always add to this. But like we've said a couple of times in this application video tutorials, don't change something after you start using it, because it'll confuse people or yourself when you see something similar but it's not the same, and you already covered that. For example, if it says chassis and undercarriage and then you have drivetrain, these are similar, but this is the chassis, that the undermounting parts that hold the drivetrain in place. So you don't want to repeat things in here that don't make sense as far as duplication or somebody's using it in the wrong place. For example, if this was engine parts on one and it says engine parts electrical, that might be okay, but you might want to go and use engine parts and then up here put the description or the comments over here to clarify it better. This particular field, you have to have created your vendors, and in that particular case, by the way, up here I missed one field. This is the manufacturer of the item that you're actually working with. So if it were a computer and it was Bosch, then that would be Bosch as far as the item is concerned. In there is the manufacturer. And then down here from the vendor, this is a little different than the manufacturer in that this is the vendor you purchased that item made by that company. So you click in here, and I've created these records in the actual vendor screen, which includes the name of the vendor, the location, and their address in there. And if you click on that, say for example, right now I have Keller in there, which is this one. If I came down and put this one in, you're going to find that it's going to switch over and put that one in the area. You got to be a little careful when you're putting them in that you do get the right one in that screen. Okay, now that we've got that in there, we have also a plus and minus, so you can move. These are called hot buttons. So you, instead of having to always go back to the do action, you can go next record, previous record, and move through the different records within this area. Now, the equipment status, this is the current status of the items that are in this particular inventory items record. For example, are they in stock? Are they awaiting parts, delivery, and so forth? And this is also editable, so you can set it up as to how you want it to actually be. The status is a current status. So for example, if you're actually looking at this and you want to say received, and there were no records in there as far as items that are currently in stock, then you want to say received until you actually bring them in and put them on the shelf, and then you would go ahead and have that. And you can also put your on the shelf information over here too, where you have these are stored in a certain location on your premises, or they might be in a truck, a repair truck or a field repair truck or a trailer or something like that. Then you'd put that in there where these parts would normally be found. Or you can have multiple places: warehouse 2, shelf 10, mobile truck, blah blah blah. Okay, so you can see what I'm talking about. Now these are going to be a little bit more interesting down here. Standard price is what you're actually selling the item at. This is the cost, average cost that you're paying for this item. So for example, if you're buying this from multiple vendors, you would not keep switching this every time you go to a different vendor. What you'd want to take is the blended rate for the standard cost and take that particular rate as far as what the cost would be. So say for example it's a couple of dollars one way or the other, and you've ordered this 10 times and you've got a blended rate. Now that's what you want to use. Next thing you want to do is, if you put both of those in there, it's going to show you what the margin is on the actual value. $450, $349, it's $101. So that would give you an idea of what the actual rate is. If you are selling something and you put a standard cost that is below the actual cost here, you're going to get a negative number, and the field's going to change color to indicate that you went too far and you're now into your margin and you don't have any money you're going to make on it. So you don't want to do that. This is the next field down. This is the inventory based on what is actually in stock currently. You have 2 of these on hand, and the actual, I don't know why it says 76. That would be the actual value of the item that is in the inventory right now, and that's what you would put in there. And it should be calculated based on the actual value of what's in there. Then you also have, and we showed you this earlier, where you have the discretion to create your own discount rate, or just plug in a number on the actual invoice that would discount the actual row or line item from that inventory if you want to discount it. And this will actually show you the discount that you're taking. At 1%, it's $4.50, and it would remove that amount from the actual selling price. So it'd be $445.50 is what you would actually be selling it at. Pretty straightforward stuff. The next thing is your quantity on hand, the quantity on order, and the quantity received. Now, when you're doing a purchase order, this will key in and indicate what's going on as far as the information is concerned. And it does that, what we call a closed loop inventory system, where the on hand is adjusted when you write an invoice. It'll go down by whatever amount you put on that invoice. The quantity on hand would then reflect the current balance after you order. So for example, I put a quantity of these on order to replace the missing ones, and there could be a high or low level that you want to keep these at, and you can also comment keep them at a certain high or low level down here in the equipment area, so that you know that you have assets when you need them. Now, part of the reason for having the find, like we talked about before, you can look for everything that has a negative number or something that is equal to less than 1, and it'll bring up every record that doesn't have anything on order. Or if your on-hand quantity is a negative number, you could say anything that is less than 1 or less than 1/2 or something like that would bring up all the records that do not have a quantity on hand. Then you can go to the list view by clicking on the list view here and go through and see which ones you need to reorder. So this is a fast way to identify the items that you need to order. And of course you can make decisions as far as each one of these. Maybe you don't need a quantity on hand. Part of the report that you're looking for your inventory system is things that indicate that you're not using them that often. And that's where these come up over here on the other side. Now this particular field here is something where you can click on it and you can insert a picture. You can copy and paste something from your another application. Like I can go, this one was actually taken from Google Images, and I copied it there and pasted it here. But if you have a website for the vendor, and you go to the vendor website and you can take their actual picture of the item and put it in here. You can do it in two different ways. You can take the image by its URL, or you can just copy and paste it. I suggest in a lot of cases what you do is you can take the URL and just paste it in there, but in this particular case it's not like the data portal. When you do the URL, it should bring up the image. If it doesn't, then you're going to have to make the copy and paste of the actual image so you don't just get the URL in there. Okay, the next thing we want to look at is something that's very vital as far as the tracking of information, and I'm going to start from the bottom to show you what that is. That's called stock serial numbers. When you have an item that comes to you from a vendor, it'll have a serial number on it. When you're adding it to your inventory, you want to take that item and go down and take the serial number wherever it is on the labels that you have here, and go ahead and put that in the serial number block up here. If you ordered 2 of these, 5 of them, 10 of them, then you would have 5 or 10 serial numbers that you're going to put in there. You would copy the equipment name from here and drop it into here, and then you would put the serial number status, which is any one of these, and you can edit this to add a different information. For example, issued, salvage, reorder, in stock, core, non-serialized. Now, non-serialized means that there is no serial number for that particular item. That can be an actual thing. For example, if you're putting oil in over here, there's no serial number for the oil, so this would be a non-serialized item. But you do not have to put non-serialized items into a inventory item if it's obvious that they don't have serial numbers. If this has got installed into some other vehicle or whatever, you can do this by clicking in the installed, and that particular item would be indicated as installed, and it would have a record of it in the work order and or in the maintenance records on the customer information screen as to where this item went by that serial number. So you would know to go there and find that particular item. And we're going to also have something about purchase history and invoice history up here that'll help you also to find that information. Return to client, out of stock, and so forth, and you can edit to add whatever you want to add in here. But like I said, for each item that has a record where it would have a serial number, and you receive those items, to include when you have an item come back in that is reusable, and maybe you're going to service it and use it, you would put that serial number back in here if you have it serviced. Like a good example of that would be, say, like a carburetor that's rebuilt. You would go ahead and have it rebuilt, and then you would put that back in inventory again to reuse it if that's what you're going to do. I ran a big car service company where we would take heads and have them machined and then put them back on the shelf and use the ones on the shelf that were already there while the other one's being serviced and repaired. We would then have one that we would remove from here and put it into the invoice history as far as being used and sold, and indicate that on the service record here as that one is taken out. So you get the idea of that is very important. And then in the portal record itself, if you click on the portal, you have to have data in the portal before it'll actually go to that particular portal record. So if you don't have an item in that row and you click portal, it's not going to show it. And of course, if you do add data in there, it's going to add the next record, so you can add the next field serial numbers and the information. Purchase history, pretty straightforward. You go to the actual purchase, create the purchase record in the purchase file. So you come over here and start it and put it in there, and when you come back, it will be here in this record. For example, these were created over when we did a purchase order, and then this information is here. Now understand that this is the purchase record for this individual line item in the inventory. So if you went over and you were in the purchase order and you're putting several different items in the purchase order that you want to order, then each place where it belongs, and this is part of the closed leaf inventory system, it would indicate that in the appropriate record for that part numbered item, so that you can have those showing a history of when they were used and how many you brought into the order system. This gives you the ability also to understand the ones that are received, and then if you look in the service record and serial number information, you can see the ones that were issued as well. And you'll also see that in the history record. Let's cover this a little bit more over here before we leave, though. It gives you the product ID, and there's a drop number here. If you need to change this, make sure that you're not using something that is not the actual data up here. You're only using this if you're doing a find for a particular thing, to find records that are related to this particular purchase order, and then going in there to find that. You would not want to do that in this record normally. It just gives you an idea of what's in inventory and available. This should just automatically put in, and you can see it's locked. You'd put the date that actually was ordered, the quantity that was ordered. It has a standard price that it'd sell at, and then you have the cost each of what you would actually be paying for it. In this particular case, this doesn't really reflect it. This should actually be something like whatever the actual selling price was at. Let's say, for example, it's actually $380. And I can actually change this from here if I had to, and that will change it. Pardon me, that's the actual cost that we're selling it at. I'm sorry. So we're actually selling it at a certain price. In this case, it didn't have the right date at $38. So we'll leave $380 in there saying it was discounted, and it gives you the extended cost each form of how many you actually purchased for 3 times this amount or 3 times this amount, and that's what you would actually be selling it at with the standard price. This is your cost. Okay, so that's what you actually spent for that particular purchase order for the 3 items times the $380. And if there's a shipping cost, you would add that, and it would give you the grand total. Here's the quantity that if you receive them, you would change this in the purchase order to indicate how many you actually received. And if you don't receive them all, you're going to end up with a quantity received and a balance due to you. Obviously, you'd want to contact the vendor and find out why you didn't receive them. And if you want to actually see the portal record for this, you can click on it to go to the portal, and you would see the portal data. And this is one place where you would want to go ahead and add or deduct from here as far as that information is concerned. You can go right back to the inventory from there. The next one is the invoice history. This is every time that this item has been sold on whatever invoice that was issued, and that will give you the information for the issue date, this item sold, the equipment information, the cost that you sold each, the quantity you sold, the standard prices in there, so that when you're on the invoice, you know when you set the invoice that that is the item you're going to sell it at. There's a screen here for the discount it actually sold for. And the reason all this is in here, just like it's shown in the customer service record area, you can also go right to the customer billing for that particular item from here, and you have the ability to verify who it went to, who was sold to, and then this would be the total sum of discounts that was ever offered and the summary of that, sum of quantity sold, which would be a numerical number of the quantity, the number of tax that was collected for it, and the line total for all the value for all the actual sale price for line total. And the tax would be the tax over here. And then you have a note field over here which comes from the invoice as to the status of that item as far as the inventory item. Say, for example, it is at quote and it actually was not sold. So you would not put a quantity in there. If it's not actually something that has actually been sold, do not indicate a quantity in the invoice until it's actually sold. And that way, and this would verify over here too, that if there is a thing that says it's a quote and there is a quantity in there, you want to make sure that you don't sell that item or try to sell it because it's already in a quote situation, and you would need to either order enough to cover your inventory, and then when the quote came in, you would be able to sell that item and not have it missing off the shelf, if you know what I'm talking about. Okay, let's recap a little bit. We've covered an awful lot of material information. We've set the standard for what this part is. We indicated the part number, the nomenclature for it, the type of equipment it is, the manufacturer, the vendor that it came from, or where we're actually buying it, and the status of how it's sold and the numerics of how it's sold. In this particular case, you can see when I put the proper information in there on the history, instead of $38, it used the actual inventory value and did that times 2. You can see the quantity on hand, the quantity received, and I have a delete button on the screen. If you have any historical information in this invoice, never delete it. I put it in there in case you create a record that is not the record you want it to be. Or say, for example, you added a record and you never sold the parts, you never ordered them, and it's really superfluous information. You can go ahead and delete that from your record system if it's not ever going to be sold by you. You sometimes come into the situation where you have a client that wants you to log in an inventory for that particular item that they may need, but you don't have a quantity on hand and its balance is 0, and yet you never receive it from the client because it's never used. That might be a situation later on where you can go back and delete that record because it will never be used. If you need to watch video help, you have that up here at the top of the screen. If you need any support or information as far as how to use the screen and further information, you would click over here. You go to customer information. you would click on the support button up here at the top of the screen to get your information and answers that you need if you need assistance. Once again, we're going to be covering additional fields. For example, we will go through the next fields. We did touch on a couple of these, but we will be going through these in the next videos, where we're going to actually go back and look at every one of those things that are ancillary screens for all of these and suggest what you can use them for and how they're used. We touch slightly on them when we go through. We'll completely go through everything on the last videos. Okay, thank you.